We don't get this opportunity very often. It's in the schedule, but we don't often get second Christmas. It's a big deal. Okay, maybe not a big deal, but it's a big deal for me because I've never preached second Christmas because it hasn't fallen on a Sunday. It's very rare for that to happen. So I get that joyful, wonderful gospel reading about predicting Jesus' death before he's 3 years old. Awesome. I also get a chance to really talk to you about what has happened in Matthew, and it's a great opportunity. So let's look at the characters. We have the 3 wise men, the 3 kings, the magi, whatever you want to call them. But these guys who lead very comfortable lives, get on camels, and travel for 2 years because they saw some signs that told them that the king would be born and he would bring about justice and peace for all the world. So they left where they were comfortable, and they went out and traveled for a very long time, and came to Bethlehem. And then when they came to Bethlehem, they told the king who was there that this baby king had been born. So they risked everything to go. Pretty cool deal, right? And they're not even of the chosen tribe. They're not the ones that he came to save. Which tells us what about Jesus? He's not there just for Israel. He's there for everyone, and other people recognize it. The funny thing about Scripture is, God's salvation often comes through outsiders. The people that we're not supposed to talk to, the people we're not supposed to pay attention to, often bring messages from God. Or ensure that God's will is lived out. So that's our first set of characters. Then we have Herod. And Herod is the epitome of evil. And he is evil because he allows his fear to control his responses to the world around him. This is where I think we are most vulnerable to sin. When we allow ourselves to be controlled by our fears, terrible, awful things happen. And this is what Herod does. Herod doesn't just say, oh no, there's a new king, what am I going to do? First of all, he has the authority of Rome behind him. How insecure is this man? Right? Well, we already know he's crazy because he's killed offspring, spouses. He's totally nuts. And he's allowing his fear and his insecurity to make his responses known. So he sets out and slaughters all the men under the age of 2 in that area. This is an exact mirror to what Pharaoh does to the Israelites. Did you pick up on that? Moses is saved by Pharaoh's daughter because Moses' mom hid him. In a time period when Pharaoh wants to slaughter all the Israelite babies under the age of 2. So where does the Christ child go to be safe? Egypt. So we have those who are willing to risk everything because they know this baby is the salvation of the world, because they've read the signs. We have a man who's totally controlled by his fears So he allows himself to give into sin and does acts of horrible evil against innocence. And then we have the Holy Family. Mary, baby Jesus, and Joseph. And for once, Joseph gets a spotlight. So I want to talk about him. This is what I want to focus on today. Joseph is our example of what it is to follow God. And I don't say that lightly. Because what Joseph does is he continuously puts himself second to the will of God. Every single time he is asked, he puts his own desires and his own standing and his own life second to what God calls him to do. He is the patron saint of fathers and husbands because of that, not because he can fix stuff. Sorry, guys. It's okay, we don't get it any easier, just so you know. But here's what he does. His fiancée shows up pregnant, and he decides that he's going to dismiss her, break off the engagement quietly so she's not stoned to death. And he was well within his right to do that, to have her stoned and killed. Then a messenger comes from God and says, this woman is not been unfaithful, but she is carrying the Son of God. And he says, well, okay. And he marries her and promises to care for her. Then, angel shows up again and says, this evil king wants to kill your family. Take everything that you love and go to Egypt. Leave everything you have here behind and go to Egypt. See, Joseph puts aside his livelihood, puts aside everything that he knows. He leaves behind his family. And he goes to Egypt to do what he's supposed to do, which is protect and care for his family. That's what he does. By the way, I think that's what happened to the gold that the wise men brought. I think that they needed money, and so they used it. They're in Egypt, he gets established. We don't know how long they're there, but he's there for a while. And once again, the angel of the Lord shows up and says, it's safe now, return. And once again, he picks up everything, and he leaves behind all that they've established to follow what God has called them to do. Not an easy choice. And then he hears that they might still be in danger, so he doesn't go to Bethlehem where his family is. He goes to Nazareth, the place that's in the farthest, it is not where you want to be. And if you remember, there's a quote where they say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? That's the reputation that this town has. And so here is Joseph, who leaves behind everything once again and establishes himself in the middle of nowhere in some ways. Once again, to protect his wife and his child. See, we are called to put ourselves behind the will of God. to become less so that God can become more. This is why Joseph doesn't get center stage all the time. Because every single time he was asked to, he stepped back. When I counsel couples for marriage, we often talk about Scripture because they need to pick Scripture for their wedding. And one of the things I ask them to do is to pick the Scripture readings independently of each other and then be ready to discuss it with me there, often to mediate. Because this is often a very contentious point. Some of the recommended readings for the Episcopal Church are problematic for, well, women. Partially because most women have not done a study in Scripture to realize what it's saying. Most men haven't either. So there are readings that call for wives to be submissive to their husbands. That goes over really well. Let me tell you, and I'm not one of those people who handles that well myself. I didn't do it well at 3. I don't do it well at 42. I'm working on it. The irony of that whole thing is that I have taken vows to be submissive both to God and to my bishop. Yikes. We did not include obey in our wedding vows, because that also would not have gone over well. However, what I have learned in our very short marriage is that by putting yourself second, you put each other first. And any of you who have been married longer than, 45 minutes, will learn this as well. What I want those couples to do when they're negotiating what readings they are going to have read, I want them to hear that submission is not the same as being lorded over. And our example for this is Joseph, not Mary. Hint, hint. In addition, the job of loving your wife like Jesus loves the church is a pretty hard job. Because that means you're willing to lay down your life in order that she may be more. So we have Joseph, who lives into both sides of that every single time he's asked. Rachel Held Evans, who passed last year, she was a layperson who wrote incredible works about Scripture and theology. She had a book that she put out, we read last year in our women's group, called A Year of Biblical Womanhood, which, by the way, is the worst title ever put on a book. Because those of us who grew up in more progressive churches think, oh great, what this is about is how do I serve my husband the way God intended me to do it. That is not what this book is about. First of all, it's incredibly funny. And she chose herself to live under the principles laid out in Proverbs 31 for 1 year. She didn't do them all at the same time. But for 1 year, she didn't cut her hair. She did all kinds of crazy stuff. And wrote about it the whole time. And as she was blogging about it, she made friends all over the country and all over the world. And one of those friends is a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi's wife in Israel. And this friendship allowed Rachel to learn much more about the Hebrew Scriptures and the principles that are set out in them. One of the things that has stuck with me is this. Often in Scripture it talks about a woman being her husband's helpmeet. The helper and the servant is how it's translated into English. And what Rachel learned from this friend is that helpmeet translates from Hebrew into English correctly as this: one who stands in opposition to. In other words, when your husband and you are in opposition to each other, you form an apex, and that is an incredibly strong point. And then when you are standing back to back, holding each other accountable and holding each other up, you are able to face the evils of the world that will come against you. And sometimes one of you is less, and sometimes one of you is more. But when you do that together, you are stronger than the world has to offer. And in reading that, I had a whole new understanding of what God's intention is for us and for His love for us. You see, our God doesn't break into the world and upend it in ways that get attention. Our God breaks into the world in small, seemingly insignificant places. The places that we are the weakest is where God shows up. The places where we are the most broken, that is where God is our helpmeet, holding us up against the world. And when our marriages and our relationships mirror that, we are unstoppable in showing the world what God intends for us. And this is incredibly difficult. It's difficult with our spouses. It's really difficult with our children. And even more difficult with your siblings. Not speaking from experience at all. But learning the fine art of being less so that you together can be more. And knowing when you need to be more so that the other person can be less is why God calls us into families. So that we can learn to work that out here in the everyday nitty-gritty of our lives. It's also where things blow apart. See, Joseph shows us how God calls us to love those who are closest to us. Joseph shows us that it's not about us, but about allowing the will, the purpose of God to break forth into the world. And it's about getting out of the way long enough so that can happen. That's why singing Christmas is so cool. Because we don't get to hear this all the time. We don't get reminded that the work that we do in our relationships shows the world who God is. And we don't often get reminded that when things are falling apart, God is right there, holding us up. That our God is one who not only submits and humbles himself to become one of us, but also dies as a criminal for our salvation. See, death and life go hand in hand. They prop each other up. And God is right there in the middle of it, with us. It is an incredible gift. And my hope is, my prayer is, that I will be able to be Joseph when necessary in my family. My prayer is that you will be able to do the same. To make crazy and ridiculous decisions based on the world's standards, so that God can be present, active, and forefront in the world. That you can prop each other up or get out of the way so God can do it.